$5 million sat in Maris's briefcase. Enough to erase every debt. Enough to walk away clean. All she had to do was step aside and let them take the girl. Room 412 was quiet except for the soft beep of a heart monitor and the uneven breathing of a child who didn't know her life was being auctioned. Tamsin lay small beneath the hospital blanket, clutching a frayed stuffed rabbit like it was the only thing keeping her tethered to the world. When she opened her eyes and smiled, something inside Maris cracked. "Are you my nurse?" the girl whispered. Outside the room, Ashford's men were already moving, silent, precise, inevitable. Professionals who didn't miss, didn't hesitate, and didn't leave witnesses. The hospital wasn't a sanctuary anymore. It was a trap. Maris had spent her life following rules, keeping her head down, surviving quietly. But as footsteps echoed closer and the weight of that envelope burned against her ribs, she understood the truth. This night would decide who she really was. She could take the money and live comfortably forever. Or she could protect one frightened child and lose everything. When Maris took Tamsin's hand, the choice was already made. If you're hooked, stay with me till the very end of the story. Don't forget to like this video, hit subscribe button, drop a comment, and tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. I've got so many incredible stories coming your way, and you definitely don't want to miss any of them. Alright, let's get back to the story. Maris pushed open the door to room 412, the fluorescent lights buzzing softly above. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic and fear, a sterile cocoon that made the girl's presence seem impossibly fragile. Tamsin lay tucked under a thin hospital blanket, her small hands clutching a worn stuffed rabbit that looked as though it had been stitched together 100 times. The child's chest rose and fell in uneven, shallow breaths, each one a quiet plea that seemed to echo through the otherwise empty corridor. Maris swallowed hard, the offer from Ashford still sharp in her mind. $5 million. 5 million reasons to walk away, to leave the girl behind, and let someone else do what Maris could never condone. She had counted the coins in her pocket less than an hour ago, wondering if she could scrape together rent and groceries. And now, a single signature could change everything, make all her problems vanish. The girl stirred, opening one eye, a faint, tentative smile curving her lips. "Hi," she whispered, her voice raspy but clear, innocent in a way that made Maris's chest tighten. "Are you my nurse?" Maris knelt beside the bed, forcing herself to speak evenly, hiding the turmoil roiling inside her. "Yes, Tamsin. I'm your nurse. I'll make sure you're safe." Her fingers brushed the child's hair back from her forehead, and for a moment the hospital walls melted away, leaving only the small, fragile human being who needed her. Tamsin's eyes, wide, unguarded, and painfully trusting, locked onto Maris's. They were the eyes of someone who had known more fear than a child should ever endure, eyes that had survived secrets and shadows she couldn't yet understand. Maris felt the weight of the choice pressing down on her, heavier than any bill, heavier than any threat. This wasn't about money. It wasn't about survival. It was about whether she could live with herself if she let this child be taken. The silence stretched, punctuated only by the soft beep of a monitor and the distant shuffle of nurses in the hall. Maris traced the edge of the blanket with her fingertip, imagining the cold hands of Ashford's men sweeping in, removing Tamsin from her bed, her life hanging by the thinnest of threads. She could see it clearly now, like a shadow etched into her mind. There was no justification, no excuse that could soften the horror of that act. Tamsin yawned and burrowed closer to her rabbit, tugging at its floppy ears with a kind of simple joy only children could muster. Maris's resolve hardened in that instant. She could lose everything, her job, her security, her old life, but she would not lose her humanity. The money in Ashford's crisp envelope might build a palace of comfort, but it could never build the quiet strength that now surged inside her. She straightened, her jaw set, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. She looked down at Tamsin, at the small, trusting face that had no idea the danger closing in, and whispered, "I'm not letting them take you.
Not now.
Not ever." And in that moment, Maris understood something fundamental about herself. Courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was choosing what mattered most, even when the cost was everything. Outside the room, the hospital corridor waited, long, empty, and fraught with shadows. But for the first time that night, Maris felt ready to meet it head-on. Maris pressed her back against the wall outside room 412, the fluorescent lights casting harsh, shifting shadows that seemed to move with a life of their own. Every footstep in the corridor made her heart skip. Every distant clang of a cart against the linoleum floor sounded like a warning. She peered around the corner, expecting to see a passing nurse or orderly, but the hall was empty. Too empty. A chill ran down her spine. Then she saw it, a dark figure lingering near the end of the corridor, motionless, as if carved from shadow. One by one, others emerged, slipping silently from the stairwells and side doors. Maris counted 3 at first, then 5, then more, all converging on the ward with a precision that could only belong to trained professionals. Ashford's men. She could feel their presence in the way the air seemed to thicken, the way the hum of the hospital lights felt suddenly oppressive, almost hostile. Maris's mind raced. The main exits were in sight, but each one now had a shadow in front of it, an unblinking sentinel. The glass doors that led to the parking lot, the stairwell that led down to the loading docks, even the elevator lobby. Every path was blocked. She sank to the floor behind a supply cart, breathing shallowly, trying to steady the pounding in her chest. She could feel Tamsin stir beside her, small hands clutching at her sleeve. "What's happening?" the girl whispered, her voice trembling. Maris forced a calm she didn't feel. "It's okay, sweetie. We'll be fine," she said, though the words felt hollow even as she spoke them. She pressed a finger to Tamsin's lips, signaling quiet. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to flee, but there was nowhere to go. Ashford's reach was closer than she had imagined, more immediate, more suffocating. The shadows on the walls seemed to stretch toward them, elongating and bending with the flickering lights, turning the corridor into a maze of menace. Maris's mind flicked through every route she knew, the service corridors, the maintenance tunnels, the laundry room vents, but even those were risky. One wrong turn, one stumble, and they would be caught. And yet, she couldn't allow panic to dictate her actions. Tamsin's safety was hers to command, and she would not fail. A muffled laugh echoed from the far end of the hall, low and deliberate, and Maris felt the weight of the decision pressing down on her chest. Ashford didn't just send men. He orchestrated fear, controlled it like a maestro with a baton. And now, Maris was his unwilling audience. She drew a deep, quieting breath, her hand tightening around Tamsin's small one. "We have to move," she whispered, voice firm despite the tremor beneath it. "Stay close and trust me." She scanned the room, mapping every shadow, every corner, every potential escape, knowing that the choice she made in the next few seconds would determine everything. Somewhere beyond the walls, beyond the men, there was a way out, but finding it would take every ounce of courage, cunning, and desperation she possessed. And Maris, for the first time that night, felt the surge of determination solidify into action. The shadows on the wall were closing in, but so was her resolve. They would not take Tamsin, not if she had anything to do with it. Maris crouched behind a supply cart, Tamsin's small hand trembling in hers, and studied the corridor. The shadows of Ashford's men stretched across the walls, unmoving yet oppressive, like predators waiting for a signal to strike. She knew she couldn't wait for them to make the first move. Every second they lingered increased the chance they would spot her, and Tamsin's life would be lost before she even had a chance to act. Her gaze flicked to the wall-mounted emergency panel near the nurse's station. A thought sparked, wild and reckless, but it was the only option. Code blue. Triggering one in another wing would send the staff scrambling, alarms blaring, and, most importantly, it would pull Ashford's men away from the ward long enough for them to move. It wasn't a perfect plan, it was chaos, but chaos was her ally now. She led Tamsin silently down the hall, keeping low, the girl pressed against her side. Each shadow passed like a threat, each flicker of light a warning. Maris's heart pounded in her ears, but she forced herself to breathe, to think, to focus. At the panel, she pressed the button for the pediatrics wing across the hospital. Nothing happened at first. Then, a shrill alarm pierced the stillness, echoing down the halls, followed by the metallic clatter of nurses and doctors rushing to respond. Tamsin gasped, clutching Maris's arm. "What's that?" she asked, wide-eyed. "Something that's going to help us," Maris said, forcing a smile, though the tension in her jaw betrayed her fear. "You just stay close and don't make a sound." The hallway shifted almost immediately. Ashford's men stiffened, exchanging silent glances, their careful formation beginning to falter as the alarm rippled through the building. One of them hesitated near the end of the corridor, glancing toward the source of the sound. Maris knew this was her chance. She grabbed Tamsin and darted into a side corridor she had memorized during years of night shifts. The sterile walls blurred past, lights flickering overhead, shadows twisting unnaturally around corners. She moved fast but silently, every step measured, every breath controlled. The sound of approaching staff and rolling carts created a tide of confusion that masked their movement. A guard rounded the corner ahead, his gaze sweeping the corridor. For a heartbeat, Maris froze, holding Tamsin behind her. Then the alarm drew him away, and Maris exhaled slowly, the tension in her shoulders easing just enough to keep moving. She navigated through storage rooms and maintenance doors, each turn calculated, each step bringing them closer to the service tunnels she hoped would lead them out. Tamsin's hand tightened in hers, small fingers gripping with trust that Maris knew she had no right to take lightly. "We're going to be okay," Maris whispered, more to convince herself than the child. "Just a little longer. We're almost there." The chaos of the code blue spread, and Maris allowed herself a fleeting surge of hope. The ward was no longer a trap. It was a labyrinth she could navigate. Every alarm, every frantic shout from the other wing became a weapon she wielded against the darkness closing in. And with each step, Maris felt the first true spark of defiance ignite within her. She would not give Tamsin to Ashford, no matter the cost. Maris ducked into the narrow utility corridor, the faint hum of the hospital alarms fading behind her. The scent of bleach and laundry detergent mingled in the air, sharp and sterile, but it carried a strange comfort. At least here, the shadows seemed less deliberate, less predatory. She glanced down at Tamsin, whose small frame shivered against her side. The child's wide eyes darted around the dim corridor, tracing every shadow, every flicker of light, and Maris forced herself to remain calm. "There's a shortcut," she whispered, guiding Tamsin toward the service elevators. "It'll be cramped, but it'll keep us safe." She could feel the tension coiling in her stomach like a living thing, but there was no time to dwell on fear. Every second mattered, every hesitation could cost them their chance. At the laundry bay, Maris paused, scanning the room. Rows of carts sat empty, draped with sheets and towels. She chose one and gently eased Tamsin inside, covering the girl with a thin sheet, careful to keep her face visible but obscured from casual view. "It's going to be okay," Maris murmured, brushing a strand of hair from Tamsin's forehead. "Just like a secret fort. Nobody can see us here." The child's small nod barely reassured Maris, but she allowed herself a breath, then pushed the cart toward the service tunnel access. The wheels squeaked softly against the tile, an almost guilty sound in the stillness, but it was better than running through the main corridors, better than risking detection. She glanced back once, imagining Ashford's men combing the wards, frustrated by the chaos of the code blue. The thought tightened her chest and sharpened her resolve. This gamble, this absurd, desperate maneuver, was the only path to keep Tamsin alive. The service tunnels were narrow, low-ceilinged, and smelled of dust and old machinery. Pipes ran overhead, dripping in places, the occasional rat scuttling across the floor. Maris kept her hand steady on the cart, pushing with care so Tamsin wouldn't jostle too much. Every turn she knew, every shortcut memorized during her years of night shifts, became a lifeline. She whispered directions to Tamsin like a secret map. Left here, then through the grate, almost there. The flickering fluorescent lights above cast moving shadows, and Maris imagined eyes everywhere. She knew Ashford's men would soon realize the girl was missing, and would comb every corridor systematically. The stakes pressed against her ribs, a physical weight, but she let it fuel her focus rather than stall her. Halfway through the tunnel, a distant clatter echoed, sharp against the emptiness, and Maris froze. Tamsin whimpered softly, her head pressed to Maris's shoulder. "Sure," she said, her voice a whisper but firm. "We're almost through. Don't worry." The cart continued, wheels sliding over metal plates, the shadows dancing across the walls like spirits warning her to turn back. Maris's pulse pounded, but with each step, the air seemed a little freer, the danger a little more manageable. She pushed onward, knowing that soon, if she could reach the next grate leading to the loading area, they might just slip from Ashford's grasp. The hospital above might be crawling with his men, but down here, in these narrow tunnels, Maris felt a spark of hope, fragile, but alive, and she clung to it with everything she had. Maris's fingers tightened around the handle of the laundry cart, her knuckles pale in the flickering light of the service tunnel. Every step brought them closer to the grate that led to the loading dock, closer to freedom, or closer to discovery. Tamsin's soft breathing was the only sound that grounded her, a fragile rhythm against the tension pressing in from every wall. Then, a sharp vibration against her hip made her start. Her phone. The screen lit up, a name she had dreaded appearing. Ashford. The sight of it made her stomach drop, a lead weight of dread and inevitability. She knew, without even answering, what the call would mean. With a trembling hand, she swiped the screen and put the phone to her ear. "Maris," Ashford's voice came first, smooth, cold, utterly controlled. "I see you've made things difficult. Clever, but foolish." The words slithered through the speaker, venom wrapped in silk. "I want Tamsin, and I will have her. You know what happens if you interfere." Maris froze. Don't you dare," she whispered, her voice shaking, though she forced herself to remain steady. "Oh, I dare," Ashford said, and the tone shifted, darker, sharpened with menace. "I know where your family lives. I know their routines, their habits. You make this right, Maris, and they remain untouched. You refuse, and they pay the price." Tamsin stirred, a small whimper escaping her lips. Maris swallowed hard, pressing the phone between her shoulder and ear, one hand sliding protectively over the child. The tunnel walls seemed to close in, the faint hum of distant machinery now deafening in its intensity. She could feel her resolve wavering, the primal terror clawing at her chest. No. She shook the fear from her mind, forcing herself to breathe in controlled bursts. Ashford thrived on control, on fear, on making people question themselves. But Tamsin's life, this small, fragile being who had no one else, was now entirely in her hands. "You won't touch them," Maris said finally, her voice low but firm. "I don't care what threats you make. You won't touch my family, and you won't touch her." A pause. A faint, almost imperceptible sigh. "Bold," Ashford murmured. "We'll see how long that courage lasts." He hung up before she could respond, leaving a hollow echo of his presence lingering in the tunnel, a threat that pressed against every nerve. Maris sank against the wall for a heartbeat, her mind spinning. Fear clawed at her, but beneath it, a hard kernel of defiance began to form. She had faced death in 1,000 small ways before, shifts filled with emergencies, lives hanging by threads, but never like this. Now, the stakes were real, personal, intimate. The choice was clear: succumb to terror, or push forward and protect the child at all costs. She looked down at Tamsin, who blinked up at her, wide-eyed and trusting, and felt the swell of resolve in her chest. Her heart thudded painfully, but her grip on the cart tightened. They were so close. She whispered, "We're not stopping.
Not now.
Not ever." With one last deep breath, Maris pushed the cart forward, the wheels squeaking softly against the concrete, echoing like a heartbeat in the narrow tunnel. Ashford's threat hung heavy in the air, but she refused to let it control her. Every step now was a choice, and she chose courage. Maris eased the laundry cart into the corner of the supply room, the dull clatter of the wheels muffled against the tiled floor. The room smelled of bleach and damp linens, a faint metallic tang lingering from the pipes overhead. She crouched behind the cart, pressing Tamsin close against her chest, feeling the child's rapid heartbeat against her own. Each breath Tamsin took was shallow, anxious, and Maris fought the urge to soothe her with words, knowing any noise could betray them. The distant echo of footsteps reached her ears first, a slow, deliberate shuffle that didn't belong to the hospital staff responding to the code blue. Maris's stomach knotted. Ashford's men were meticulous, trained to search every nook, every corner, every hiding spot. She could almost hear the calculations in their minds, the way they moved like shadows through the sterile halls, leaving tension and fear in their wake. The door creaked open, and a guard's shadow stretched across the room. Maris's chest tightened, and she pressed herself against the floor, her breath caught between fear and urgency. Tamsin whimpered softly, and Maris's hand flew to her mouth, muffling the sound with careful pressure. The child's eyes were wide and shining with panic, and Maris whispered, "Shoo, don't make a sound. Not a word. Just stay with me." The guard's boots scuffed against the floor as he moved closer, scanning the room with practiced precision. Every second stretched, elongated by the weight of danger. Maris could feel the sweat pricking her hairline, her heart hammering, her palms slick against Tamsin's tiny back. The cart offered some cover, but she knew it wasn't enough if the man chose to look under it. Tamsin's small hand twitched against hers, a nervous impulse that almost betrayed them. Maris tightened her grip, holding the child's fingers gently but firmly. "You're doing great," she whispered, voice almost inaudible, a lifeline in the sea of fear. The guard bent down slightly, his shadow falling over the cart, and for a heartbeat, Maris thought Tamsin would cry out. But she held steady, her calm resolve radiating in the hush between them. The man straightened, muttering something under his breath, then moved on, his boots fading down the hall. Maris exhaled slowly, feeling the tension drain slightly from her shoulders, but she knew it wasn't over. Every corner of the hospital was a potential trap, every shadow a threat. She pressed herself against the wall, gently brushing a strand of hair from Tamsin's face.
"See?
You're okay. You did exactly what you had to do." Tamsin nodded slightly, sniffling, leaning against her. Maris allowed herself a fraction of relief, but didn't let her guard down. They had come this far, but the exit was still ahead, and Ashford's reach was long. Every step from here required precision, courage, and nerve. With her hand steady on the cart, Maris whispered again, more to herself than the child. "Almost there. Just a little longer. We're not letting him win." The weight of responsibility pressed against her chest, but it no longer paralyzed her. Every heartbeat, every careful step, every quiet moment of courage brought them closer to freedom. And Maris, breathing through the fear, knew that letting Tamsin survive meant risking everything, and she would do it, no matter the cost. Maris pushed the laundry cart toward the grate that led to the loading dock, each squeak of the wheels echoing in the narrow service tunnel like a warning. The faint smell of oil and damp concrete seeped in through the vent shafts, a harsh reminder that the hospital's sterile walls were behind them now. She allowed herself a fleeting surge of hope. Freedom was so close. Just a few more turns, one final stretch, and then her breath caught in her throat. The loading dock was lit with dim, swinging overhead lamps, shadows pooling into corners. And there, leaning casually against the side of a black SUV, was Ashford. His tailored suit absorbed the light, his expression calm, almost bored, as though he had been expecting them. He clapped slowly, deliberately, each strike of his hands echoing across the concrete like a countdown. "Well, Maris," he said, voice smooth, cold, and utterly controlling. "You've managed to make this interesting." His eyes scanned Tamsin in the cart, lingering on the child with the predator's fascination. Clever, very clever. But cleverness isn't enough. Maris's stomach turned to stone, but she kept moving, pushing the cart forward, positioning herself between Tamsin and Ashford. "You're not taking her," she said, voice steady despite the fear clawing at her throat. "Not today. Not ever." Ashford's smile widened, thin and unnerving. Bold words from someone holding a child in a laundry cart. He pushed off the SUV, his movements fluid, deliberate, like a panther closing the distance. "Do you really think courage will save you?" Maris's pulse raced, every instinct screaming that they were outnumbered, outmatched, but she wouldn't, back down. She glanced around, noting crates and barrels along the dock. Improvised barriers, temporary cover, a chance to make a stand. Her hand rested lightly on Tamsin's shoulder, grounding herself with the child's fragile presence. Ashford advanced, slow and deliberate, the space between them charged with tension. "You could have taken the money," he said. $5 million. A life free from fear and struggle. Instead, you chose this. He gestured broadly, encompassing the hospital, the tunnels, the entire chaotic night. "And now I protect her," Maris said, her tone unwavering. "That's all that matters." Ashford's eyes flickered with something, amusement, respect, or perhaps disbelief. He lunged suddenly, a swift, controlled move that forced Maris to react. She sidestepped instinctively, rolling the cart toward a stack of crates. The wheels skidded across the concrete, a harsh screech in the stillness. Ashford reached for the cart, grabbing the edge, but Maris used his momentum against him, jerking it back just enough to force him off balance. The standoff lasted seconds that stretched like hours. Tamsin clutched a rabbit, eyes wide but silent. Maris felt the weight of every choice she had made culminating in this one moment. Ashford froze, evaluating her, calculating, and then, finally, he straightened, expression unreadable. "You're persistent," he said slowly, almost admiringly. "Very well. But persistence has a cost, Maris. Remember that." With that, he stepped back, melting into the shadows at the edge of the dock. Maris exhaled, a long, shuddering breath, but didn't relax completely. Tamsin's small hand found hers, and together they moved forward, the grate looming ahead, their final barrier and their only chance. Maris kept the cart moving slowly toward the loading dock grate, her senses stretched taut, every sound amplified, the faint hum of fluorescent lights above, the distant scrape of tires, the soft shuffle of boots that might be Ashford's men returning. Tamsin's small hand clutched hers tightly, her fingers trembling, but she didn't make a sound. Maris's heart pounded with a rhythm that felt like it might give them away, but she forced each step to be deliberate, careful, precise. The grate ahead was small, but it led to freedom, to the one thing Ashford could not touch, a chance at life. Maris had memorized every inch of the hospital's layout during her night shifts, every shortcut, every tunnel, every exit. This knowledge was their lifeline now, and she clung to it like a rope in a storm. The wail of a distant ambulance siren cut through the night, faint at first, then growing louder. Maris had called it earlier, timing the arrival to coincide with the shift change, a brief window when chaos would cover their escape. She nudged the cart forward, each squeak of the wheels a prayer that the approaching personnel would provide the distraction they desperately needed. Voices echoed from the hospital entrance, staff hurrying in and out, clipped instructions, the shuffle of hurried feet. The night had transformed into a maelstrom of sound, an orchestra of confusion that masked their presence perfectly. Maris pressed Tamsin down slightly in the cart, whispering, "Almost there. Just a little farther, sweetheart. You're doing so well." Tamsin's eyes, wide and luminous, met hers, filled with trust that Maris didn't take lightly. Every ounce of fear, every second of terror, had led to this moment. The ambulance screeched to a halt just outside the open doors of the loading dock. Medics jumped out, stretchers in hand, shouting instructions over the wail of sirens. The chaos gave Maris the cover she needed. She maneuvered the cart past the edge of the dock and into the vehicle's open side door, lifting Tamsin inside with trembling hands. The child's soft gasp of awe and relief warmed Maris's chest, even as adrenaline still coursed through her veins. "It's okay," she whispered. "You're safe now." The medics barely noticed, distracted by the flood of patients and the sudden surge of activity that accompanied a shift change. In the blur of uniforms and rushing feet, no one saw the small, hidden passenger in the ambulance. Maris stepped back for a heartbeat, catching her breath, the enormity of what they had just accomplished pressing down on her. Outside, the hospital loomed, a fortress of shadows and danger they had just evaded. Ashford's reach was long, his threats real, but for this moment, Maris had won. She exhaled slowly, feeling the first fragile thread of relief snake through her body. Tamsin's fingers tightened on hers, small but firm, and Maris allowed herself a brief smile. The night had tested them, pushed them to the edge, but they had made it. The ambulance doors closed, the engine roared to life. As it pulled away from the loading dock, Maris pressed her forehead against the cool metal, whispering a promise to the girl she had risked everything to save. "You're safe now. No one will take you." Maris sat on the edge of a narrow cot in the safe house, the faint hum of the heater the only sound in the small, dimly lit room. Tamsin lay curled up under a thin blanket on the floor, her stuffed rabbit tucked snugly beside her. The child's breathing was even, peaceful, a fragile rhythm that Maris could finally let herself admire without fear. For the first time since the night had begun, she allowed herself a moment to breathe, though her body remained tense, wound tight from hours of running, hiding, calculating. The hospital, Ashford, the men who had haunted every corridor, they were gone from this small space, but not from her mind. She had crossed lines she never thought she would, made choices that would make her a fugitive in the eyes of the world she had once known. Her career, her life of quiet routines, the small comforts of her old world, all of it was gone, collateral in a war she had chosen to fight for someone else's life. Her gaze fell on the crumpled envelope she had stuffed into her jacket pocket hours earlier. She pulled it out now, the pristine, stark white of the cashier's check mocking her in the dim light. $5 million. Enough to erase every debt, every worry, to create a life she had once thought impossible. Enough to buy safety, luxury, freedom. And yet it meant nothing. Nothing compared to the soft rise and fall of a small chest, nothing compared to the eyes of a child who trusted her completely. Maris drew a deep, shuddering breath, then tore the check in half, slowly, deliberately. Each rip felt like a physical release, a severing of the temptation, the fear, the moral compromise she had refused to make. She folded the pieces again and again until they were nothing more than confetti, useless and powerless in her hands. There would be no repayment for the fear she had endured, no reward for the risk she had taken. But that didn't matter. What mattered was that Tamsin lived, unbroken, untouched by the darkness that had chased them. Tamsin stirred and looked up at her, eyes still heavy with sleep, but shining with trust. "You're not leaving me, are you?" she whispered, voice small and tentative. Maris shook her head, forcing a smile that was more weary determination than joy.
No.
"I'm staying right here," she said softly. "No one can take you from me." The night outside stretched long and uncertain, full of threats and shadows. But inside this tiny room, Maris felt the first real pulse of peace. It was fragile, hard one, and it came at a price she would bear for the rest of her life. She had lost her old world, yes, but she had gained something far greater, a moral victory, a courage she hadn't known she possessed, and the knowledge that she had done exactly what she was meant to do. She glanced at Tamsin one last time, the child asleep, her small chest rising and falling in a calm rhythm, and let herself exhale. Outside, the world could judge her, hunt her, erase her name, but in that room, in that quiet, dim light, Maris had found what truly mattered. She had chosen life over money, courage over fear, and in doing so, she had won something no one could ever take away. The shredded pieces of the check lay scattered on the floor, a silent testament to her choice. And for the first time that night, Maris allowed herself to feel free.